guys, welcome back to my channel for another video. Today I want to have kind of a heart-to-heart chat about what I've learned over the course of our last homeschool year, because I've been thinking and reflecting on these things as we move into this new year. If you've been around a while, you know that last year I had a 7th grader, twin 6th graders, and a kindergartner, so we had a lot going on. And even after all these years of homeschooling, I feel like every year still teaches me a few things. God called me into homeschooling when I never thought I would be doing it, and I'm convinced that He uses it to sanctify me, just as He does with parenting, right? So I've been thinking about the things that have helped my kids and I grow, thinking about some things that I learned the hard way, and also some mindset shifts that I've had that have made a big difference for me as a homeschool mom. So that's what I'm going to share in today's video. Some of these things are practical, some are more reflective, but I hope that by sharing some of the things that I've learned, you'll be encouraged, especially if you're a new homeschool mom figuring things out, or you're just looking ahead to this new homeschool year. And of course, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What did you learn this past year in your homeschool? We all learn and grow right alongside our kids, and I think it's just so helpful when we can share and encourage each other. So pause right here and drop your comment below. Okay, let's jump in. One of the biggest lessons I had to relearn this year, and I say relearn because I've definitely had to learn it before, is the value of flexibility. I went into the year, as I usually do, with a very specific plan. I had all of our curriculum picked out. Everything looked nice and tidy on paper, but last year I made more changes mid-year than I think I've ever made before. We ended up switching our history to the Mystery of History curriculum. Science didn't go quite as I thought it would for my youngest, and I also ended up adjusting what we were doing for spelling because it just wasn't fitting in well with our current season. We are making some big changes in our math curriculum for this upcoming year, along with doing a lot of things differently for my 1st grader. Years ago, I would have been afraid to make changes mid-year because I had the mindset that I needed to just stick with something and see it through, and that my kids would have learning gaps or get behind if I didn't. There was a time when I would have felt like I failed because we didn't stick with the curriculum I originally chose. But I've learned that being willing to make those changes and not holding so tightly to a plan just because it was the plan is actually a huge strength in homeschooling, and that recognizing when something isn't serving your family well and having the courage to pivot is actually one of the best things you can do as a homeschool mom. Now, I will give a little caveat to this. It can be really easy to fall into the shiny object syndrome trap, right? There are so many great curriculum options and learning resources out there, and when you hear about something new, it's easy to question if you're missing out or if what you're using isn't good enough. I definitely caution against just randomly jumping from one thing to another. I mean, we choose what we choose for good reasons, right? But sometimes you just don't know how something is going to go until you get into it. It looks great on paper, but you've got to put it into practice to see how it's going to work for your schedule, your kids, and your preferences. So if you find yourself needing to make a change, it doesn't mean that you messed up or made the wrong decision in the first place. It just means that you're paying attention to what's actually working and what's not. That's not failure, that's wisdom. Remember that homeschooling isn't about sticking to a plan. It's about doing what's best for your kids, even if that means switching gears sometimes. Another big thing I learned this year is that learning styles really do matter. I know that's something that we all say. We want to tailor learning to our kids. But this year I saw firsthand how important that is, especially with my kindergartner and my oldest. For my kindergartner, I tried to have him sit in on science lessons with his older sisters. We were using Science in the Beginning from Berean Builders. Now, my girls love that curriculum, and it's supposed to be geared for kindergarten through 6th grade, I think. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to use it. I figured it would be easier if I could combine our science lessons and teach my kindergartner alongside my girls. Now, for some kindergartners, I can see this working, but it did not work for my little guy. He had a hard time sitting through the readings, and he just wasn't connecting with it. It was kind of the same thing for my 7th grader. He used Science in the Atomic Age, and again, great curriculum. I have zero complaints about the curriculum in general, but my son really struggled with how text heavy it was. And to be honest, that was one of the reasons that I picked this curriculum, because it was all textbook and lots of experiments. And typically my son enjoys video lessons and interactive online stuff. He had done Science Shepherd previously and really did well with it. Well, instead of leaning into this strength of his and what he enjoyed, I got in my head and started worrying that he was doing too much online, and thought that, we should do a textbook heavy course just to make sure he could do it. I don't know what I was so worried about or was trying to prove. My son can obviously read and is very smart. It was just very clear, though, that as we got into the curriculum, it wasn't as effective for him. So this year we are switching back to something that does have a video component, but it also has a textbook portion, because I do think it's important for him to build his skills in being able to read and gather information from actual books. But I wanted to make sure that we were using things that he likes to learn from and are engaging for him. So I guess my big takeaway here is this: just because the curriculum can work for a certain age group doesn't mean it will work for your specific child. I had to pay attention not just to what the curriculum says it's good for, but to how my kids actually learn. And for my little guy, that meant more hands-on, short and sweet lessons. And for my 7th grader, it meant realizing that pushing him into something text-heavy just because wasn't helping him grow. It was actually holding him back. He learns better with a mix of video and bookwork, and that's okay. I'm still figuring it all out, but this year was a good reminder that honoring how my kids learn is way more important than sticking to some idea of what I think they should be doing. Okay, this one might sound obvious, but hear me out. I've always considered myself a planner. I mean, I love making schedules, setting things up in Homeschool Planet, and all that. But if I'm being honest, most years I've kind of just planned week to week. So I'd get our curriculum, skim the teacher's guide, add our schedule into Homeschool Planet, and maybe plug in the first few lessons. And then I would spend every Sunday night planning out our next week, adding lessons to Homeschool Planet for my kids and making sure that we were where I wanted us to be. That wasn't necessarily hard or a bad thing, but it did take time out of my Sunday evenings. And it wasn't really something that I looked forward to every week. It kind of became a burden. So this summer, I decided to try something different. You guys maybe saw some of my recent planning videos where I showed how I set up our Homeschool Planet. And I really wanted to try to get all of our lesson plans in the planner before our school year started. So I basically don't have to be doing this week to week. So you might have seen how there were 3 classes, our Writing and Rhetoric, Essentials in Writing, and Shorman Math, I think it was. So those 3 classes where I used lesson plans from the Homeschool Planet Marketplace, and I pre-populated all of our lessons for those classes into the planner. I had done this for a couple of our classes last year and wasn't sure I was going to do it again, but honestly, it's such a time saver that I decided it's worth it. For a couple of our other classes where I didn't need so much detail, I used some of the built-in assignment features that Homeschool Planet offers to fill in all of those lessons. And then finally, I had CTC Math for my girls. This one took a little bit more time because I needed to manually add in each of the lessons for them. So while it definitely took some time up front, I got it done, and I'm already feeling lighter going into the school year. I know I'm not going to dread those Sunday night planning sessions anymore. I know we're still maybe gonna have to shift things around here and there because that's just homeschooling, but having everything laid out ahead of time gives me so much more peace going into the year. Another thing I relearned this year, you know that magical phrase, open and go? Sometimes it's more like open, realize you should have prepped, panic slightly, hold on, let me print this real quick, and then go. Ask me how I know. There were definitely a few times last year when I sat down with my kids ready to jump into a lesson, only to realize that I hadn't printed something, didn't have the right supplies, or I hadn't actually looked over the instructions ahead of time. And then I would end up fumbling through it, getting frustrated, or making my kids wait while I scrambled to get my act together. So while yes, the curriculum was technically open and go and didn't require a ton of prep, it still worked out so much better for us when I took just a few minutes the night before or even that morning to read through it and mentally walk through what we would be doing. Sometimes open and go can be confused with easy to teach, and that's not always the case. For example, I started the year with All About Spelling for my girls, which is scripted, open and go. I've loved using this in the past with my son, but this year it just felt like too much. It's very teacher intensive and it got really hard to keep up with for our schedule. So we ended up switching to some Evan Moore spelling workbooks mid-year, and honestly that ended up being just enough for us. Similarly with Logic of English, we've been loving it. It's also scripted and technically open and go, but I'm really glad I decided to add the online supplements this year for our lessons. That has given me a little breathing room while still being present with my son during his lessons and giving him a solid foundation. So what I've learned is this: just because something is labeled open and go doesn't mean it's totally effortless or even the best fit for right now. Sometimes you still need to prep a little, sometimes you've got to tweak things, and sometimes you just need to switch it up altogether. Figuring that out this year helped things run more smoothly and saved me a lot of mid-lesson scrambling. Okay, this was a big one. I personally like structure, but I used to think that being super structured would take away the joy of homeschooling, that it would feel too rigid or too much like school at home, you know, what everyone always tells you not to do. So for the most part, I clung to the idea of going with the flow, following a loose routine in our homeschool rather than a strict schedule. And that was fine for a while. But this past year, I learned that too much flexibility actually made things harder for us in this season. Yes, my kids had checklists and knew what they needed to do each day, but everybody was working at their own pace. Some of my kids like to get up early and power through their schoolwork, while others preferred to take their time and spread things out. And that was fine until it came time to do our group subjects. Because we didn't have a consistent time for those, it ended up being different every day. And that led to frustration because somebody would be in the middle of something or just not mentally ready, and it just felt disjointed. So after seeing how that played out last year, I put together more of a schedule for this upcoming year. There's still flexibility. We're not locking ourselves into a minute-by-minute plan or anything, but we're going to have clear blocks of time. We will eat lunch at a set time every day. We will have a set time for group subjects. And my first grader, you know, he will be having more on his plate this year and need more one-on-one time with me. So this structure is going to help all of us stay on track without feeling rushed or scattered. Okay, another one of the biggest lessons I learned this past year was about setting better boundaries between homeschool and the work I do. I used to think that I could just multitask my way through it all, answer an email here, check something for a client there, and still be fully present for my kids. But the truth is, I wasn't. I was stretched thin, distracted, and constantly feeling like I wasn't doing anything well. So this past year, I really tried hard to flip that. I made it a priority to be fully present during our homeschool hours, and that meant putting my work on pause, structuring our days intentionally, and giving my kids my full attention while we were doing lessons. I was worried at first because I really thought this would mean that I would get less done and be less productive, but you know what? We actually got more done because we were more focused, and I actually got more done too. Our school days felt smoother. I wasn't as frustrated because I wasn't trying to jump from task to task, and I had more mental space and actual time to focus on my work later in the day. Balancing homeschool and working from home is still a challenge, even with a flexible schedule. I know I'm really lucky to have that. But it's still a challenge because, let's be honest, there's always something to be doing or something that could distract me. But this year reminded me that giving my kids my best first makes the rest of the day fall into place so much more easily, because that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Homeschooling should be my number one focus during the day. Finally, one of the biggest things I learned this year is that my kids don't need me to be the perfect homeschool mom. That's a real temptation to try to be perfect, but that will always end in disappointment, because the truth is there's always going to be something that doesn't go according to plan. A bad day, a bad mood, a lesson that we don't finish, a moment that I wish I had handled better. And when I expect perfection, either from myself or from my kids, I end up feeling defeated over things that are actually pretty normal. What my kids do need is for me to be dependable and intentional, to notice what's working, to show up with a plan, even if we don't follow it perfectly, and to build a rhythm into our days that helps everyone feel grounded. I've learned that holding myself to a high standard is good, but chasing perfection isn't. So for me, it's about homeschooling with purpose and keeping the big picture in mind, which is raising kids who love learning and love the Lord. So these are some of the biggest things that I learned from our last homeschool year. Some of them were tough lessons, some were just little adjustments and reminders, but all of them have helped me grow as a homeschool mom, and I'm excited to take these lessons and apply them as we move into this upcoming school year. I'd love to hear what resonated with you or what you learned this past year too. Please take a moment to drop a comment below. And if this was helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more homeschool encouragement. I can't wait to share more with you this year. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.